Our next speaker is Lael Parrott. Lael, and just while she gets mic'd up here, I'll introduce her. Dr. Lael Parrott is the Associate Professor in Sustainability on UBC's Okanagan campus and Director of the Okanagan Institute for Biodiversity, Resilience, and Ecosystem Services. So she studies contemporary regional landscapes and ecosystems as complex human-environment systems, and her work has informed environmental conservation policy and management decisions in Canada to help us create more sustainable and resilient landscapes.
Thank you. I have to admit that I feel very much out of my realm of comfort here because I'm used to speaking at scientific conferences. My area of research is environmental geography, and I study regional landscapes as human environment systems. And the reason I work at that scale is because it's a scale which is ecologically meaningful, and it's also a scale at which we as humans can make meaningful change. So going back to what James was talking about sustainability and the feeling of helplessness that we can have when we think about global scale problems, if we come down to the scale of a regional landscape, that's a scale where you and I as individuals can make a difference, and it's a scale at which many of our municipal and regional governments and institutions can make a difference. And so what I'm going to talk to you about today is, if I can advance my slides.
The mouse on the keyboard. Use the mouse, yeah.
Thank you. Wasn't there a little thing? Anyway, I'm going to talk to you about how human health and well-being are intricately linked to the sustainability of the landscapes in which we live. And I'm going to try and link this to university campuses at the end and talk about what we on university campuses might do to help contribute to landscape scale sustainability. And so I study landscapes as human environment systems, recognizing that landscapes have been shaped and reshaped by humans over millennia. What we see on the landscape is the result of the interactions between humans and our environment. And my definition of a landscape is a complex mosaic of human and biophysical components, the dynamics of which are coupled across scales of space and time. And by what I mean by that is that everything is interconnected. And so when I, as an individual, interact with my environment, I'm affecting some small-scale process that may interact with some other ecological process, which may interact with some other higher-level landscape-scale ecological process, and the changes in that process may in turn feed back down upon me and affect me. And so when we start thinking that way, then we start thinking about what that really means in terms of how I am embedded in my landscape and how my landscape affects me and my well-being. And so the coupling between humans and the environment at the landscape scale is often articulated in the form of what we call ecosystem services. And this is a fancy term for essentially the benefits that we as humans obtain from ecosystems. So ecosystem services are all of the materials and goods that we extract from ecosystems, as well as the different processes that lead to regulation of our environment and our climate, and which also affect our livelihoods and our well-being. And so there are many lists of ecosystem services. Some of the main ones that we always talk about are things like food and raw materials that we extract from ecosystems, clean air, erosion protection, water flow regulation, flood mitigation, water purification, biological pest control, pollination, soil regeneration and retention, aesthetics, and recreational opportunities. And all of these are things that we obtain from ecosystems and from which we benefit. And we tend to take them for free, or take them for granted, because we get them for free. Now, one might argue that we can't put a value on nature, and that's probably true. But recent research has looked at what it would cost us if we had to replace all of these services that we get for free. And the minimum estimate is $125 trillion per year at the global scale, which is significantly greater than our global economy. And similar analysis, just at the scale of the Okanagan landscape, would place that at $6.7 billion per year of benefits that we're getting for free from our natural landscape and the processes that it provides. Now, how does this link to human health? Well, we can think of our natural ecosystems as natural capital. And embedded in that natural capital are our social systems. And we can talk about social capital, build capital, and human capital that build upon those natural systems. And our natural capital provides us with ecosystem services. And it's the interaction between those ecosystem services and our social systems that contribute to our well-being. Now, in 2005, the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, which was commissioned by the United Nations, set out the relationships between ecosystem services and human well-being in a much more formal context. And so they divided ecosystem services into several major categories: provisioning, regulating, and cultural services, and established the linkages between the essential elements of human well-being, being our personal security, basic material for good life, our physical health, and our social relations. And we can establish formal linkages between these ecosystem services and these elements of well-being in terms of flows of services to our social systems, and in terms of the strength of those linkages and to what extent they might be mediated by socioeconomic factors. And if we start thinking about this essential integration and go back to the landscape scale, and we start thinking about a landscape as a mosaic of land uses and land cover, then we can look at what are the causes of ecosystem services loss. And it's often related, unfortunately, to our human activity and to our transformation of land use and land cover. And one of the main problems is the fact that we tend to fragment our ecosystems and disrupt those flows, disrupt those interconnections that I was talking about. And so we can't think about preserving ecosystem services simply by creating a few parks and conservation areas, because those are disconnected. Water doesn't stop flowing at the edge of a park. Species don't just live in a park and never escape. We need to think about connectivity and creating connected landscapes in which our human activities and the ecological processes are interconnected. And so I think of a landscape as that system, which is providing us with a number of ecosystem services. And we could conceptualize that in terms of this flower, where the size of the petals in the flower correspond to the degree to which a particular landscape provides us with a particular service. And so if you zoom down to different types of land uses and land covers, then you might find agricultural areas, such as rice fields, for example, might be very good at crop production-related ecosystem services and not so good at things like water provisioning or biodiversity. On the other hand, areas such as the Seymour watershed in the Greater Vancouver Regional District, which has been set aside specifically for water provisioning, might be very good at that particular ecosystem service, but not so good at crop production. And obviously, as you zoom out to that landscape scale, in order to support us as humans, well, we need a landscape that has a mosaic of these different land covers in order to maximize and optimize the production of ecosystem services. And so, what has this got to do with sustainability? Well, my favorite definition of sustainability is a systems-based one. The quality that a system has if the relationships between and within its subsystems are able to persist and nourish each other. So this is one that is very essential to the concept of human-environment interactions. The idea that we as humans need to interact within our environment in a way that sustains that environment and which nourishes it, and in the same time, the environment is nourishing us to the provisioning of ecosystem services. And so what is a sustainable landscape? Well, in a very simple sense, it's a landscape in which human demand for ecosystem services does not exceed the landscape's capacity to provide those services, which is a very simple concept, but one which we often forget, and one which we often cease to take into or don't take into consideration when we're thinking about land use and our interactions with our environment. And so what has all this got to do with university campuses? Let me try and make some connections. And I want to start by what seems obvious, but which we often forget, which is that our campuses are large landholders situated within regional landscapes. And this is a picture of the Glenmore Valley in which the Okanagan campus is located. And if we start thinking about our campus as being one part of that mosaic of land uses within that bigger landscape, then we can think about how what happens on our campus affects landscape scale processes and how those interactions might be complementary and might nurture one another. One of the main challenges to sustainability is related to our interactions with the environment and a lack of feedback between what we do and how that influences the environment. And often that arises from a loss of sense of place, this disconnect, often related to culturally defined landscapes. Think about the Okanagan, think about the tourism flyers that you probably looked as you were coming here. They probably portrayed the Okanagan as a land of pleasure and plenty, full of golf courses and orchards and wineries. That's a culturally defined depiction of our landscape that dates back from the early British developers 100 years ago. Imagine if they had promoted the landscape as semi-arid, dry, dusty, rocky, rattlesnake-infested. We've created cultural expectations of what this landscape can do for us. And that mediates our interactions with our landscape and can often lead to unsustainable interactions. In the case of the Okanagan, that's particularly true for water. And so what can universities do? Well, we can lead by example, by creating that sense of place, helping to reestablish that connection with the landscape, and thinking about where we're situated, thinking about how we can use our campus as a living lab to demonstrate how we could perhaps have more environmentally sustainable interactions with that landscape that enhance and nurture ecosystem provisioning. And obviously that also extends to the more practical elements such as James was talking about our energy consumption, our building use, and our overall ecological footprint. And so I'd like to leave you with the concept of ecosystem services and the idea that ecosystem services are an essential part of human health and well-being, and suggest that that's perhaps something we should be thinking about as we start talking about what that means on a health-promoting campus and how we might integrate our campuses better with the landscapes in which they're situated. So thank you.